This is Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show with Jen Vogel, a top-rated live stream and podcast in the market research and insights industry. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen on all major podcast channels. Join Jen and her guests for a weekly discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Real Talk is presented to you by VoxPopMe, the leader in video research and ranked number 1 in qualitative research by Grit 2 years running. Here's today's conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. I'm Jenn Vogel, and today I want to talk about how we can truly create a consumer-first mindset in our business, product, and marketing strategies. So to discuss that topic, I'm joined by Jennifer Pembroke Johnson. Jennifer is a global insight, innovation, and strategy leader with experience in category favorites in QSR and CPG, double cheeseburgers, minty chewing gum, and favorite ice cream treats. She loves leveraging macro trends and keeps up on what consumer behaviors are changing and why. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thanks. Good to see you.
So good to see you. Thanks for coming on today. I'm really excited to have this chat. You've got a wealth of experience from a lot of different incredible companies. And maybe that's a good place to start, is just share a little bit with our audience about how you got started in the insights industry and your career so far.
So I got started back at university, where I decided to become a marketing major. And as part of that, I took a class and built some surveys and found that to be wildly interesting, to go out on campus and interview consumers and hear what they had to say about the specific topic that we were studying. And so from that, I focused my attention towards the supplier side of research, spent time with Millward Brown, with IRI, with TNS, and through that worked on a multitude of categories. Worked on the original bottled Frappuccino launch from an innovation standpoint, lots of different pharma topics, as well as kids' toys through working with Hasbro, or razors through Gillette. And one of my other favorite kids' toys, Lego. Spent a lot of time working in the US and globally on the Lego brand and the building category. So did that, and then met a friend at an airport who wasn't a friend at the time. And she worked at this little brand called McDonald's, and we became fast friends waiting for a delayed flight. And a year later, she's like, "Hey, what do you think of coming to McDonald's?" And so I'm like, "Well, love to have a conversation." And that is, I would say, the basis of everything that I've done is, let's just have a conversation. The worst thing that can happen is that I'll say, I learned a lot and I'm not interested, but that conversation has taken me through the different brands that I've worked on and in the different assignments that I've been championed with. At McDonald's, it was having a conversation from moving from innovation, working on brands, moving over to the global side, and then taking on topics that aren't as close to what we think of as traditional consumer research, but definitely have the consumer at the center in the world of pricing. And as we think about inflation these days, consumers have a lot to say about pricing and price increase and the impact of that. When I went to Mars Wrigley, again, it was having a conversation about the gum category. And was that something that interested me? And how does that develop the skill set that I have? And then I'm moving to Wells again. It was a conversation about building an organization that was non-existent. So building out an insights function, building capability and knowledge and know-how as part of my remit there. So, and all the while eating yummy ice cream cones and the like. So that's been my career. It generally starts with a conversation, which I think translates really nicely to that consumer first topic that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such a good life lesson, like of just be open to the possibilities that the universe presents to you. Have a conversation, right? Which is, and you can see that play out in your career, which is really exciting.
No, it's true. And that's whether it is in our careers, whether that is, I have friends whose kids are going off to college. It's like, there's no harm in going and checking something out and touching and feeling and experiencing a different setting than you're used to, looking at things on paper versus looking at them in real life are very different. In the insights world, it's the difference between somebody telling you what's in their pantry and you standing in their kitchen, opening up their pantry with them and pulling out some things that might surprise and delight because they're a little different than what that claimed behavior was. So very much about just being curious and inquisitive and wanting to learn more.
Yeah. And so obviously we're here to talk about, this is a focus of yours, being consumer first.
Yes.
What in your own words, what does that mean to be consumer first?
Consumer first to me is not this idea of consumer only. I mean, the consumer, if you think about the desirability, viability, and feasibility model, it is a part of many things. Consumer first is also not validating. And I think that's something that I think we're evolving out of that, but we're not just connecting with consumers we shouldn't be connecting with consumers to validate what we've done. It's including consumers in the conversation from the get-go. And again, they're not the only part of the business question or what we're trying to do, but if they are part of it, we should be including them in the conversation from the get-go, including them in the learning and development and knowledge that we are trying to gain from the start versus bringing them in 60% of the way through development of a new product or a campaign and saying, oh, well, do you like what we've done?
So literally consumer first is
literally
starting first with the consumer. I love that. And I love how you said it's not consumer only, because there is business expertise that goes into decisions that are being made.
Absolutely.
About, what products or, hearing what consumers' problems are and providing a solution that maybe they didn't ask for, or whatever, resources you as a business have to come up with different solutions is all going to factor in. But starting with what the consumer needs are and having that at the core is really key.
Well, and you said something, and there was some chatter on LinkedIn over the weekend about this idea of research and why we do it. And, the consumer isn't going to ask us for, I want this. And it goes oftentimes to that, if Steve Jobs saying, I don't need research. I know what the consumer wants. I don't need them to tell me what they want. I don't expect a consumer to say, I want a new iPhone with a better camera and longer battery life, and I want it to be able to dance on the table when I put it there. I just set it on the table, it'll do a dance. A consumer's not going to say that. Maybe there are desired outcomes that we can ascertain from a consumer or benefits or unmet needs that we can learn from the consumer that we might embed in that new iPhone or that new automobile or that new whatever the innovation is. But they're not. I think we oftentimes and maybe the non-insights of professionals oftentimes say, well, consumers are just going to tell us. And a consumer shouldn't tell us how to do our job. We need to build those foundations in order to ladder up to what that opportunity is. And those foundations is where I think the consumer first part is important.
Yeah. And so how then do businesses, like a business that is consumer first, how do they operate? Like, you talked about building a function that didn't exist in your most recent role. Like what processes do you put in place to actually be consumer first?
Great question. A couple things. One is having the expertise. I am prideful that insights as a function, it is an expertise. And yes, somebody can, anyone can write a simple survey, but the expertise that we have built as insights professionals is to understand the nuance and the detail that we want to leverage in order to write a better survey, write a better guide. And so leveraging insights expertise is super important. I also think having the right tools in your toolbox. And that's something that over the years and over the companies that I've worked with have had the benefit of building out really strong toolboxes. So whether it's qualitative or quantitative, having a range of great moderators if we want to do qualitative work, or understanding when we might use different methodologies and having those at our disposal is really important. And as we get into where we are in 2022 and beyond, where we have the ability to have those more agile tools at our fingertips, having those at the ready so that when a question comes up, we aren't bypassing the consumer because it takes too long to learn. And that, I think, is a legacy behavior that these agile tools that we have, that we can do a quick overnight study, or we can get in front of consumers and get in their pantries over the course of a couple of days and hear what their true sentiment is in the language that they're using. We don't have to now bypass the consumer in order to shorten the time is not a barrier to including the consumer, where I think historically we've heard that it's a barrier. And then I think finally, as far as building an organization, and it's having insights as a partner and not a supplier internally. And that is really important. I think oftentimes in legacy organizations, insights has just been a support function and considered as part of a support function. And I've worked in those organizations where they're gate kept through other parts of the organization, whether that's brand, whether that is R&D, et cetera. And I think insights as a partner, as a stakeholder in the organization with a seat at the table helps both eliminate the telephone game of communicating what those outstanding questions are, but also gives us the opportunity to impart expertise and knowledge, but whether it's desk research that we have, whether it's old work that's been done that we can pull forward and leverage, or whether it is a quick way to learn to answer a business question that has an outcome that's actionable going forward.
Mm-hmm. You've said a lot of really interesting things there that I want to address.
I'm sorry.
No, really good. So if I'm an insights person and I feel in my organization like I am a supplier, like I'm not a partner and I don't have a seat at the table, like what are some tips you can give to get that? Who should I be going to and working closely with and partnering with to to make that change, to create that kind of, new environment, new culture?
Good question. I think it's a two-sided answer. Part of it is we need to act like we are partners, right? It is imperative for us to rock up and be, all the things that we believe ourselves to be in our everyday lives. So it's, I think you owning the role is important. And oftentimes we find ourselves very much in a supplier mindset and a responsive, reactive mindset. So really taking the initiative in how we show up and how we engage with others in our organization is important. On the flip side, I also think it's important for us to have those conversations, crucial conversations within the organization with our cross-functional partners to challenge them in a professional way as to, I'd like to be at this meeting, or I'd like to sit in this conversation. I'd like to partner with you, start using the language so that you can set the trajectory of the conversation. And if they can push back and say, well, we don't need you in that meeting, what are the 3 reasons why you think it's important? How do you demonstrate the incremental benefit for you to participate as an active participant in a meeting, in a conversation, in an initiative that maybe they're not seeing because they, like other legacy stakeholders, haven't really thought of you that way. And so I think that's important. And having those talking points, what is the elevator speech? I know that's a bit cliche, but what is the elevator speech that you want to give when you're in that conversation with those stakeholders? And as part of that elevator speech, what is the, I don't want to say trust element, but how do you demonstrate the payoff that they will get or that they might anticipate by including you, that the difference between you not being there or being there. So I think it's two-way, but it really is changing the mindset both internally and with the key stakeholders that you're working with.
Yeah, it's so hard, just human behavior to like sell yourself in that way. But those
Absolutely.
those are some really good tips, though. I think it's, there are definitely, some organizations that are very connected and insights is like a real core part of the business strategy. And others where I do see some of that, like, they serve the rest of the business in certain ways. And that proactive nature of insights is like where there's so much value. And I think now more than ever, people are seeing how important it is to like have those insights and be consumer first, especially as things change so rapidly. So like now's the time, like where I think a lot of businesses or leaders in businesses are receptive to that, if it's presented in the right way.
Well, and I mean, in the most direct way, it's like, stay in your lane. Like, let me be in my lane and do all my great stuff in my lane. Let me drive fast in my lane and effectively in my lane. And you, marketing or R&D or whatever, you stay in your lane and let's talk about what those business issues are that we're trying to solve for and mutually align on what they are. And then you do you and I'll do me, and let's meet up and keep each other included, of course, but let me do my job. I think oftentimes, and we have and this is one of my pet peeves, I think, is you have somebody saying, well, we just need to go use this methodology.
Mm-hmm.
And, being diagnostic about methodology, I think, is a huge slippery slope for organizations. I think I've given you the example of in an organization I've worked in, let's just go do a Zappy. I'm like, Zappy is it's not an action. Like, it's a company and they have products that we could use to answer questions. But if we don't know what the question is, like that's not a way to approach an answer. And so I think sometimes, and some of that I think goes back to legacy behaviors with perhaps like, oh, well, we just need bases to tell us what to do. And it's like, okay, well, that's a methodology that we can use with some benchmarks that we can leverage. But is that answering the question? If we're not talking about the question and we're only talking about the methodology, oftentimes I think we're answering the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we fall into that trap. I've seen it with, kind of what's the newest and latest methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, we would have my old company, we would have customers calling saying they need to do a mobile study. It was like, why do you need to do a mobile study? Because that was like the newest, coolest thing.
Right.
And now it's all studies are mobile, but anyways.
Well, but it is a challenge because it's exciting that someone's like, oh, we did this mobile study, or we did these video ethnographies and we were able to do them overnight and they were great. And I mean, there's nothing I am more excited about than that. But if all you're talking about is the methodology, like, I'm wondering, okay, how am I going to use this? Like, we'll do the research, but how am I going to use that in action? Am I going to be in front of Walmart with this research? What is Walmart going to expect from us as far as validating something or supporting an idea or telling a story? So there's so many steps in that. And so really understanding, what is the question we're trying to answer? How are we going to use the information? What stage are we in the learning journey or on the learning journey? Super important part of what we would select. And oftentimes it's just going to a name or a methodology that somebody is familiar with that they used once. And you're just like, okay, let's slow down to speed up here. Let's put a couple things on paper before we run headfirst into like putting a bid together or drawing down some credits.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I want to ask my next question, like, why do customer or businesses have a hard time being consumer first? And like you mentioned before, time isn't a barrier to including the consumer anymore because all these methodologies that you do have at your fingertips are a lot faster. So what do you think some of the challenges are with being consumer first?
I think there's definitely just legacy behavior. There's, whether it's the people, the Steve Jobses, and we've all worked with them, who say, I know the consumer better than they know themselves, and there's nothing I'm going to learn from a consumer, or focus groups are crap, or whatever, because that seems to be a popular statement, or some methodology is not worth doing. So I think there's some of that where you have legacy behavior where people aren't really on board with including the consumer. I also think that oftentimes we conflate, well, I've got some equipment I want to use, or I want to do something that is a better price point for our own margins. And so I'm fixing a business situation, and we don't really think about how the consumer should be part of that. And so I think that's an important, challenging people, individuals who they talk about they can make something. And yes, we can make it. We can make a piece of gum that's got glitter on it, and it's got, superpowers and caffeine, and we can put all these things in because we have the capability. And I think they get caught up in capability and not really, okay, but you still want somebody to buy that. You still want somebody to engage with the product, evangelize with their community, etc. So how do you, I think those are some of the barriers. I also think, budgets. And in theory, a lot of these methodologies that we have that are more agile and certainly more cost effective can unlock some of that. I think there's preconceived biases that research is expensive. And let's face it, research can be really expensive. I mean, you can spend just gobs of money to learn things. You can also do them efficiently and effectively. So I think there's a little bit of that in play, where people just have, we don't have the budget for that. Okay, well, what budget do you have? And then how do you think about what can we learn with the budget we have? I think that's a little bit of the retraining as well. So, and I guess finally, everybody fashions themselves as an insights person. I can write a survey. We can do this. We can staff it out to an agency. Like, it at times can be a bit transactional, or, well, I learned that in B school, I can do that. Yeah, we took a class. And I think that gets back to my previous comment about expertise. Insights professionals bring a world of expertise and knowledge and know-how that can really amplify and take what we're doing from good to great. And versus having, yes, somebody can run a study by themselves, but doing it with excellence and weaving that red thread into what the business needs are, I think, is something that my insights friends are particularly gifted at doing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think as a marketer, I can relate to that of, everybody thinks they can do marketing because everyone gets marketed to, right?
Right.
So, and I think there is, in the case of marketing, there's a difference between being creative and having good ideas, which are always welcome. Like, we get some really great ideas from around the business, right? Or from outside the business, people that aren't marketers. There's a difference between that and the process, the art and the science together of, actually turning it into something that's going to perform or, have a particular outcome. And I think with insights, it's very similar. Yes, people can write a survey and can get an answer to a question quickly. And that's probably really valuable for what it is. But there is a point where the science and the expertise is really critical. And I think, like, kind of what you were talking about before about being a partner to the business and showing, like, if I have this seat at the table, this is what I can bring to it, maybe helps with that conception that, like, well, anybody can do it, right? It's not that complicated. It's just writing surveys, but it's really not.
Well, and I think it goes from that, and it's the tactical, like, yes, I can write a survey, or I understand statistical significance, to answering a holistic business question that really is a more strategic insights lens of what we're trying to answer. And that's a big part of the difference is people can speak to, understanding, like, the different the different ways in which we might answer or do a concept test. But if we're trying to build out ideas and take them all the way through to a finished product, there are many steps where we would include the consumer. And so just doing a concept test is just a tactical exercise that is one piece of a larger puzzle. That larger puzzle is where Insights, I think, does a good Insights team excels tremendously, because they're bringing it all together, and they're not just, it's not a plus B equals C equation. It's really dimensionalizing, taking it from one dimension into 3 dimensions, and getting the organization to feel like the consumer is sitting on the journey with them at all times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you think about like the balance? Because, there's a lot of, controversy, I would say, like just in the industry, right? Like, people who are not Insights professionals shouldn't be doing research, right? Mm-hmm. But I think there's a balance of like, how do you enable people who are maybe not in the Insights department to be consumer first? Because that's the benefit, right? Is like they want to talk to the consumer just as much, and you don't want to damper that energy, but also maintain like the important work that you're doing in the Insights function.
I think that's where the partnership comes in. When we talk about partnering, it's not that I don't want to hear from my brand team or my R&D team or a culinarian or whomever as part of the process. A good a strong cross-functional team, you want to be able to hear different points of view or different ideas that will give you ahas and help you build out better research. So it's not to say, when I say stay in your lane, it's like let's sit and collab on what the business question is, and then let me take a stab at figuring out how to answer that. And gosh, I'd really like you to be, sitting in the kitchen with me while we're raiding somebody's pantry, and if we're going old school, and finding out all the things they claim they don't buy, but they really do. One of my all-time favorite experiences. But or hey, here's, if we're doing online ethnographies, like here's access to the videos. Please go, like, tell me what you think. I want to hear, what was the surprise and delight for you? And build those perspectives in. I think that's how you include the other members of your organization and your cross-functional team, is making them feel like they have a voice without having them dictate what you're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's all about partnership and collaboration.
It is. #collab is one of my favorite things. It really is. And I mean, I spent 10 years at McDonald's, and one of the best things about working there was every time we worked on something, it was as a cross-functional team. Mm-hmm. And that was a great foundation for me, is just to love working cross-functionally with people, even if you disagree with their perspectives. But that cross-functional team really is empowering. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, we are going to take a quick break for our weekly segment with Vox Pop Me's VP of Research, Brian Monchine. This week, he shares tips on multitasking. Is it even possible to multitask? Well, he'll try to prove that it is. Let's check it out.
Today, we're going to be talking through some helpful hints for multitasking. So the definition of multitasking is the act of juggling 2 or more tasks or activities at the same time. And some would say that definition is flawed because the human brain can't effectively focus on more than one item or task at a time. Well, I'm here to prove them all wrong. So I figured, what better way to give some tips on multitasking than to multitask while I'm doing it? So I'm going to try to do this Rubik's Cube while I'm giving you tips on multitasking, and we're going to see how this works. So here goes. Okay, first things first. What I like to do is make a to-do list. I think it's always good, if you're planning to tackle multiple projects at once, to have it all organized in one place. So write out that to-do list, get all your tasks down on one piece of paper. The nice thing about that is that when you're done with each of those tasks, you get to cross them off. And there's no better feeling than crossing off a task that you've been meaning to get done. So start with that list, have it laid out, and that way you can work against that throughout the day. The next thing I like to do with that list is to prioritize your tasks. So there's different ways that you can do this. I like to use the ABC method, where it's essentially, you've got it laid out where the A's are the most important items to get done, the B's are the next most important, and so on and so forth. If you've got some C tasks on there, those are probably the things that if you didn't finish those today, it's not going to be a huge deal. So lay those out, you know, whatever method you like, but just make sure you've got some type of prioritization against them. The next thing I like to do is group similar tasks together. So sometimes it's hard to switch your focus between different tasks. And I think it's always good to, you know, group some of those things together, because hopefully you can knock those all out at one time as you're working on things. So again, the nice part about that is, again, it gives you a chance to cross a bunch of things off at one time. So grouping those tasks together, I think, is always a plus, and it allows you to really, you know, get some focus on a few different things at one time. Next is try to stay focused and avoid distractions. Not always an easy thing to do, especially if you're working from home and you've got a lot of distractions at home. I think sometimes it can be tough, but there's a few tips that I can give you in terms of helping to avoid distractions. I think one thing is establish a designated office space in your house or apartment. I think it's always good to have that space that you go to, and it's really meant for working. You know that, and so does everyone else in your house too. So that way you can really, you know, try to focus as much as you can. Another thing to do is silence your phone while you're working as best as you can. I know it's not easy. You know, we all have phones for different reasons, but if you can really try to focus on the work at hand and have the phone silenced at certain times throughout the day, I think you're just going to get so much more done. So try to do that. And then another thing is something that I've tried is noise canceling headphones. So throughout the day, you're going to have a lot of things distracting you. And if you could, in some way, eliminate some of that. It could be the dogs barking outside. It could be the Amazon truck coming down the street. Whatever you can do to try to eliminate some of those noises, I think is always going to help you focus on your multitasking. Another tip is work in blocks of time and try to take regular breaks. Your mind can only focus so much throughout the day. And if you get some breaks in there, I think it's always going to help. So you can do things like take a walk, watch a podcast, try some meditation, try the Rubik's Cube, whatever it means for you to just try to get some of that time to just walk away, focus. It's going to reset your brain and you're going to come back so much more refreshed. And then finally, focus on the small wins. So you may not finish that entire list, and that's fine. But if you can knock out most of those items on your to-do list, you should be pretty proud of that. So good luck on that multitasking, and we will see you next time.
I'm like blown away.
I know, it's so hard.
I can't do a Rubik's Cube when it's the only thing I'm focusing on. I was just like, could not even handle that. That's amazing. Brian,
when I was a kid, I used to take them apart and put it back together because I'm like, there's no way I can twist it. I can break it and put it back together.
Right. I'd peel the stickers off and then replace them. I'm blown away. Thank you for that, Brian. And well done on the timing also, like right at the end of your tips. So I guess it is possible to multitask and do more than one thing at once. I'm really impressed by that. I forgot what we were talking about, honestly.
No, but I was going to say, it's one of the things, you know, if we're talking about the insights roles, the multitasking piece is huge because we are often a small but mighty team, and not resourced in the same way that other parts of an organization might be. We are put on, we are having to make sure that we understand the whole scope of what we're working on. There's oftentimes tons of little details, like making sure that you followed up to make something's gone into field, or do we have are we talking to the right consumers, or what have you? And making sure that you're purposeful as to where you understand the organization's priorities are and how does that translate to your priorities, and understanding that not everything can be an A priority, I think those are really good tips, not just in how you and how you go about your everyday, just doing your work at home, but also like, how do you show up with your organization to make sure it's clear that they understand that you know what the organizational priority is, and you don't lose sight of that. So I think it's a really salient topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and not just for insights, like everybody's
Right.
got
Right.
so many, being pulled in so many different directions all the time, and being able to manage that, prioritize, and balance is really key.
Absolutely.
And hello to Julie. Thanks for listening in and chatting in. Anyone else who's listening, if you want to chat with us, we can see your comments and we appreciate them. So what tips can you offer for having that sort of ongoing conversation with consumers? Like, what's worked for you and your teams in the past? You're talking about, literally consumer first and then consumer throughout the process. What are some tips you can offer?
So one of the things I think is super helpful is briefing. Like, if we think about, and I love I often say in my daily life, we need to slow down to speed up. I know we want to move really fast, but let's really get a comprehensive and well thought out brief as to what we're really trying to answer. And before we get in front of consumers, I think that's super important. And that gets us away from, I think, that methodology trap of we need to do this type of research. It's, what are we trying to answer? Like, what's in scope? What's out of scope? Like, what questions do we have? I think that's really an important first step in getting everybody grounded and singing from the same songbook, as some like to say. I think also, as we talk to consumers, one of the first things I like to do is acknowledge the biases that we do have, which is something I don't think we do often enough, is say, you know what, like, I'm a meat eater. I don't eat non-dairy or vegan or vegetarian. Like, that's not something I do. I've never shopped that aisle. I've never engaged with that consumer. Well, let's talk about that bias up front, because it's an important one to acknowledge, so that we know that when you are giving a point of view or reflecting on research, some of that is includes an unconscious bias that could move the conversation away from what the consumer is actually saying. So I do think that's a really important one. And as we think about embracing trends and we think about looking to other continents for what's going on with consumers or products or experiences, making sure that we understand some of those biases as well. If you've never seen with your own two eyes some things, that oftentimes, like, if you've never traveled to Asia to see kind of how the Asian culture might foil against what goes on in the US, then understand that you might not have the same perspective as somebody who has. And so how do you educate and upskill yourself on those differences, or at least acknowledge them and keep them front and center? And then, again, I think it's really important to make sure that you have a seat at the table, so that as an organization, you are continuing to, pepper things in where needed. Continue to think about how you sell insights and that sounds really cheesy, but how do you show evidence of insights being powerful? When you think about the work that you're doing, how do you make sure that the consumer voice actually can be heard? And that's an important part of qualitative work. And I know there's a lot of, the pendulum swings between whether or not qualitative is useful or not useful, or everything is shifting to an AI environment or what have you. I think having people hear consumers speak in your organization is really powerful. It's much easier to tell somebody internally that you don't believe what they're saying, or you don't believe the data, but having your people within your organization hear consumers, their voices, see their expressions, their emotions, that connectivity, that empathy is huge, and it can't put a price tag on it.
Yeah, it is so powerful. I mean, when you see people's reactions to what people are actually saying. And so, I mean, how do you share that kind of information internally? Because I think sometimes like some really powerful insights get stuck, within the insights team? Like, what are some of the ways that you share more broadly so that people can actually see it and be able to have that reaction?
So it's if you're doing a presentation, embedding some video clips, if you have access to that, whether if you're doing qual work, to pull that in, even if you haven't done the research, how do you use things like YouTube or TikTok to get people to engage with maybe the age, if you're talking to somebody, or if your consumer target is a tween or teen, and the people sitting in the room are 45 years old and don't have children of that age and aren't around children of that age, or 35 years old, or whenever, if they're not exposed to that age cohort, how do you use social media to and things like TikTok to come in and be brought in to upskill them on who that consumer is? How do you take them or give them a quest to do? I've done that a bunch of times in my career, where let's go spend the day as an organization and go shop some of the places that we know teens and tweens like to hang out, and see how they behave in and of themselves. I mean, your own research is shopping the aisle. And so how do you get to know the aisle if you're not that person? How do you invite people to be curious by doing a shop along, or just going out and doing a quest in a marketplace to, go have 5 different hamburgers in 5 different places and see what the experience is, and have everybody benchmark and check off what they've heard so that they get that firsthand experience.
Yeah, I love that. I love the quest idea. And
they're fun.
Yeah, totally fun. We have a question from the audience, which I'd love. Thank you, Albert. Do you have any tips for having your internal clients listen better and objectively? I do love what you said about, kind of identifying your biases, going into the research. But, is that something that you do after the fact when you're presenting it as well? I was really struck by that point that you made. And what I was thinking as you were talking was like, those biases aren't necessarily negative. It's just that you don't have that experience. Right. And being aware of that going into it can really help you be more objective. So anyways, I don't want to answer your question. This question
it's true. And one of the best experiences that I had, and a little story I guess I'll tell is, I was sitting at a table with a bunch of people who we were evaluating a coffee product and an espresso based product. And there was a woman at the table who was very strong in her, opinion on it was too strong. This beverage was just too strong. And oh my gosh, it's so coffee forward. And I think we need to dial that back. And we're sitting kind of evaluating. And there was another woman at the table, and she's like, do you drink coffee? Well, no, I don't drink coffee. I drink tea. And so the challenger woman, I'll call her, said, yeah, I'll drink a double shot of espresso 5 times a day. I'm not the consumer for this either. So you had like the 2 extreme biases of coffee consumption sitting there having, giving an opinion. And the one who was the super heavy coffee consumer knew that she should keep kind of mind her comments or contextualize her comments, because they could sway the conversation. And she used that to educate the other woman at the table that, gosh, you know what, this isn't a product for you. And so weighing into, your bias is that you don't drink, you're not a consumer. So you can try it and you can weigh in, but making sure that it's really clear as to, you don't use this product as part of your everyday life was a real aha, I think, for both of them. And for the rest of those sitting at the table. So I think that's an important one, and we don't do often enough. I also think that, Albert, to your question, when we present information internally, we oftentimes skip the step of like, what are you expecting to get from this? And at the end or after the presentation, did this meet your expectations? What are you going to do with this? So I think those two add-ons, kind of flanking the if you're presenting research, is important. I think as far as listening better, getting to what are you going to do with these outcomes up before you go into it is important. And it's an important step where oftentimes when we think about these things transactionally, we have to do an X test and we're going to, check the box and say we've done it. I think people just look for a number to tell them that they're hunting in the right space versus the value that's underpinned within that. So I think doing a little, as an insights expert, doing a little bit of the legwork up front with that organization to make sure that there's alignment as to, what you're trying to get out of it versus going through the motions is important.
Amazing. All right. I've got one more question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
What is one of the things that people claim they don't buy that you saw in their pantries?
So another, I guess, little anecdote. I was doing some work for a pretzel brand, and we did in-store shop-alongs, and then we went back to their house. And so we're in the aisle, and, it's, oh, this whole grain this, and oh, the low cal and the low sodium and the low fat and everything. Great, taking notes, and I'm moderating through it. And I'm like, so, do you ever buy, like cheese puffs or Doritos or, things that are flaming hot and electric orange? No, we really, we like the kids. Pretzels are great because they're wholesome and whatever. It's okay. And so we're going to go back to your house and, kind of bring some product in and show them, some product in their kitchen. This guy knew we were going back to their house. So we go back and the house is all beautifully cleaned up. There's a candle burn. It was like, he knew we were coming. Somebody knew we were coming. And we get everything set up. And I'm like, so do you mind if we just go through your pantry a little bit just to see what do you have on hand today? And, we had seen all kinds of things that in the people's pantries, a bag of nuts that they got on an airplane or something that was left over from a kid's school trip. And he's like, well, what? And I said, no, I just, let's pull out what you have in the pantry. And so he's pulling stuff out. And there's, of course, half-eaten bags of this and that. And then he pulls out a box of Cheez-Its and 2 ginormous plastic bins of cheese balls that you would buy at a Costco. They're ginormous. And I'm like, okay. Can you help me with these 2 big bits? Did you have a party? Just trying to get it. And you could tell he was embarrassed. And I'm like, they're salted snacks. It's not a big deal. And he's like, no, well, the kids, when they have friends over, they really like them. And I'm like, it's okay. Hey, cheese balls. Who doesn't like cheese balls? Yay, let's eat them. And then I said, and do they, the Cheez-Its, the box of Cheez-Its, that we didn't really get to that in the aisle. What do you think of this? And he goes, well, no, that's my box. And I was like, you don't share it. And he had 3 kids. And he's like, no, it's my box. He's like, it's my box. When I want to sit down and Netflix and binge, it's my box of Cheez-Its. I don't want anybody else's hands. The kids know they're not allowed to touch my box. And I was like, where was all this when we were in the aisle? And he's like, well, it's kind of embarrassing. So I think it's those things people feel a little bad about, but we're not, when we're doing research, it's not to make people feel bad. It's the difference between attitudes and behaviors, right? It's that people say one thing is they think it's what you want to hear. Yeah. And then when you get into their underwear drawer, you're like, it's kind of interesting.
There's a box of Cheetos hidden in the back of there.
Right. But it was hysterical. And he turned bright red. And I'm like, oh, sir, I'm not here to make you feel bad. But,
Right. Oh,
so yeah, it's very interesting.
I love it. I'm trying to put myself in his shoes and decide if I would admit to the 18-pack variety bag of Cheetos that's in my pantry right now. I would hope I would, but
right. But it's fun. So
it is fun.
So we have a question.
We do. Yes. We've got lots of comments and things like that. Thanks everyone for participating. Mauricio has a question about balancing tight timelines. How do you kind of balance that the short timelines that are presented? And Yeah, he's talking about relying on years of informed intuition, which is so true.
Right. I think the one of the things and one of my uh, great insights leaders that I've worked with does a fantastic job of workshopping. And I think when we, if you're thinking about a 7-month timeline, like how do you maybe do a workshop within that 7 months to get everything on the table? Again, it's getting to that spirit of #collab, where we really want people to feel like they can weigh in, and whether it's finding a creative way to the years of experience in an industry and putting that up and maybe whiteboarding, and also then finding ways through some of our more agile tools to get some more in moment or conversations with consumers or small data points versus waiting till the very end. To get that, I think, is important. So we can use workshopping and whiteboarding and those conversations to really keep people on track, make sure that we're not swinging all the way to institutional knowledge and we're not swinging all the way to the consumer, but kind of doing that throughout. The other part of this with Teams networks and Slack channels and such, I think it's a great way to keep all of the information and collaboration that we had in one place, so that we are more present and accountable as to the things that we're thinking about, the chat that we're having on a certain topic. But I do think, at least from especially some of the more recent projects that I've worked on with my teams, it's, how can we answer some small questions with those agile tools to keep people engaged and moving in the direction of that fast innovation. I don't know if that's helpful, Mauricio, but I do think that those workshops become incredibly helpful.
I love it. #collab is the theme of the show. Thanks, Mauricio, for your question. Albert, same to you. Thanks, Julie and Marlene, for your comments. Loving all the audience participation today. And Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been so much fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. It was great to chat and see you again.
Absolutely.
Two Jennifers.
The two Jennifers.
Jennifers in one place.
Well, thanks everyone for joining in and listening. We'll be back with another episode tomorrow. I'll be joined by Dennis Wakabayashi, and I will see you then.